Biopharma is a rapidly changing space. A lot of important conversations and decisions happen every day in response. This is Pharma Unscripted from RTI Health Solutions, where we bring those conversations forward. I'm Peter Worth, Senior Director of Business Development and Growth Strategy at RTI Health Solutions. Today, I'm joined by two RTI colleagues who bring a combined 60 years of experience in drug development. Gnanasakthy, Principal Scientist of Patient-Centered Outcomes Assessment, and Odom, Vice President of Biostatistics and leading a great team that does a lot of really innovative PRO analytic work. This season, we're diving into how evidence is evolving and how that's changing access with a sharper focus on the patient experience. And today, we're focusing on oncology, where safety and efficacy don't always tell the whole story. As treatments get more complex, tolerability is becoming a much bigger part of the picture. So, we'll be talking about how tolerability is actually measured, the role of patient-reported outcomes, and how all this can shape regulatory and reimbursement decisions. Enjoy my conversation with Ari and Dawn. So let's start from the beginning. What is tolerability? How is it different than side effects and safety?
Great question, Peter. Research defines tolerability as the degree at which AEs can be tolerated by a patient, which can be translated to include both the patient's willingness and ability to adhere to treatments. The key here is that it comes from the patient. This is different from safety, which is aimed at assessing the medical risk of a treatment to patients using clinical information, such as AEs, labs, vitals, etc. Often you'll hear researchers use these terms interchangeably. And while they're related, they are not the same thing. Tolerability is in essence a patient's unique benefit-risk assessment. For example, a clinician may think that patient's level of diarrhea is mild, but for a patient with an active lifestyle, it may be very disruptive and cause lots of anxiety. Ari, I know you have some thoughts on this.
Yeah, so we've done some work recently. I think it was in 2024. We found that clinicians use the word safety and tolerability interchangeably. So they look at safety data and they assume, this drug is tolerable, without taking patient's voice into consideration. So what physicians are looking at, like what Dawn just suggested, is that from their point of view, if the medical risk is manageable or acceptable, they think it's also tolerable. But that may not be the case, especially in the cancer setting. Let's say if grade 1 diarrhea for 3 weeks may be fine for a clinician, but may be highly intolerable for a patient.
Any other thoughts on tolerability?
Well, I mean, one of the things that's a kind of accepted wisdom, if you like, is that patients will tolerate anything as long as the benefit outweighs the risk. Otherwise, patient has cancer and they are told that they're going to have chemotherapy or some targeted therapy and they're going to have some adverse events, nausea, diarrhea, vomiting, rash, etc., etc. And what are they to do? They will tolerate those adverse events or side effects of the treatment, which we normally wouldn't. Let's say for toothache, we wouldn't tolerate that sort of side effects, but they'll tolerate it because they know that, or they expect the treatment will bring benefit. So there's an internal calculation that goes on in patient's mind, looking at benefit and treatments, and they will accept the intolerability or the tolerability of the drug, given the benefits that they're going to experience. So it's not a yes, no, p-value kind of a decision. It's a conclusion based on many, many aspects, and that will be different for patients, and it'll be different for clinicians. And it will be different for payers.
Okay, great. So Ari, tell us a little bit more about why tolerability is important for patients, providers, and for payers.
So we just said that the tolerability as a concept is going to be different for these different groups. Now, for patients, it's important because they want to know how a new drug, a cancer drug, is going to affect their day-to-day lives. Do they have to take time off from work? Do they have to get up 3 times at night to go to the bathroom? So they want to know how it's going to impact their lives. Now, note that it will differ between patients who are young or in the working population than compared to those who are later in their lives. So it's not uniform across all patients. So it depends on who you are from a demographic point of view. It impacts patients who don't understand the disease, who don't understand adverse events, who don't understand the impact of adverse events, and the need for concomitant medications, nursing visits, etc., etc. And as for physicians, it's important, like we said earlier, that they want to know, are these patients going to stay on this medication and reap the benefit of the drug, the outcomes? Or are they going to come back in 2 weeks and say, look, I can't take this anymore, give me something else? And they have to go through another another sort of evaluation or process, and probably prescribe a substandard a medication that's not perfect for the patient because of the adverse event. So physicians are looking at the impact of tolerability on the outcome and the medical risk, the risk of patients going into hospital. So the risk of having to have extra nursing visits or even death. So physicians are looking at that point of view. And then I assume the payers won't know if the prescribed medication is not going to be adhered to and the patients are going to switch from one to the other, it has an economic impact. So they want to make sure that a certain medication is tolerable such that patients will be on those medications to the time prescribed to experience a desired outcome. So the payers are, as the name implies, they are interested in the economic outcomes. The clinicians are interested in the clinical outcomes, and the patients are interested in day-to-day life. What's going to happen to me? And am I going to live long as well?
Ari, tell us your thoughts about caregivers and tolerability.
That's a good question, Peter. So not all cancers are experienced by adults, and there are also pediatric cancers and geriatric cancers, and caregivers play an important part in those segments, even among others too. So sometimes it's not about the impact of life on patients alone. It could also be the impact of lives of the carers. So if, for example, if a treatment requires frequent visits to infusion centers or visits to oncologists, that may influence the tolerability profile of the treatment too. So it's not purely because of what the patients experience or their needs, but it also how it can influence carers. Carers may have to take time off. Frequent visits to physicians or infusion centers. So that brings extra burden. So they may influence what treatment patients may withstand or experience.
Okay, great. So we've gotten a base knowledge of understanding of what tolerability is and the tolerability influences across the patients, providers, payers, caregivers. Let's shift gears a little bit. And Ari, Donald, throw this out to both of you. When should our pharma partners be thinking about their overall tolerability strategy?
So good. Let me go first, Don. Then you can chip in next. So, of course, early is always good. For example, it's even said recently within the oncology space, assessment of tolerability from patient's point of view or patient standpoint can influence dose finding decisions or dose optimization decisions. So early is always good. Another reason why early is good, if there are issues you want to know early, so the pharma companies can build in mitigation strategies or start thinking about how to mitigate those tolerability issues as drug development moves on. Especially this is important in crowded markets like prostate cancer or non-small cell lung cancer area, where there are lots of medications and efficacy and safety alone may not be enough. You might need something more to differentiate the treatment from what's already available there. So early is always good. Don't leave these things to later. But there are challenges. Why don't you take that?
Yeah, thanks, Ari. I completely agree. As a statistician, I'm always going to agree that early is good. We need to be, it's of benefit to be thinking about both the measures and the endpoints as early as possible so you can properly plan for your phase 3 registrational trials later on, including both understanding when to collect the information, what instrument you want to use, the time points of interest, and to adequately power if that's your goal. There are many challenges, as you mentioned, similar to collecting PROs in general. As always, your sample size can be limited in oncology studies, and often your trials are not powered on the PROs or those type of endpoints. But some of the biggest challenges and unique, I think, to oncology is thinking about the timing of the assessments to align when you have the anticipated toxicity. That can be different over time, depending on the toxicity, and it can differ between treatments. So again, just to make things more complicated, as well as it's not uncommon in a trial for the two different treatment regimens that are being investigated to have different regimen schedules. So one may have every 3 weeks, one may have every 2 weeks. And all that can make things very complicated. So the earlier you're thinking about that, the better. Ari, what else are people considering?
Yeah, so I mean, let's not forget that patients may tolerate or how they view tolerability or treatment tolerability in an acute setting, so a short-term treatment, may be different from how they feel about in a chronic setting. So they might, patients might think, well, if this treatment is only for 3 months or 6 months, or maybe even, a year, I'll tolerate, I'll stick it out. But if it's something that's going to take me, 3 years, 5 years, let's say early breast cancer studies or something, or chronic leukemia, then they will be more concerned or more sensitive to the tolerability of the treatment because it's going to take a long time. And there are lifetime events that might be happening during that time, and they may be more sensitive to that. So depending on the setting, sponsors may want to be aware of that aspect, the difference between acute setting and chronic setting, how it might differ.
So kind of along those lines, we've got the strategy, we're thinking about it. What are some of the common PCOA, PRO tools that are used to capture tolerability?
But, tolerability is not like physical functioning. There's no tool, there's no digital device or SF-36 or anything like that. Tolerability is a conclusion based on different factors. And patients' reported outcomes or patients' view of their treatment is only one aspect of it to come to a conclusion that a treatment is tolerable. So, for example, in cancer setting, patients' reported outcomes are important. So the severity of the side effect, the duration of the side effect, they are important, and how they impact patients' day-to-day life. But that needs to be complemented by the number of times patients tend to take treatment breaks, the number of times patients may want to just leave the study. So there are other pieces of information, dose titration, for example, the number of times physicians may decide to reduce the dose or increase the dose. So all those hard endpoints, if you like, need to contribute to patients' reported outcomes to come to a conclusion that a drug is tolerable or not. Now, that's a regulatory component, if you like, a regulator's view of whether a drug is tolerable or not. It depends on different parameters. So the bottom line is there is no one single questionnaire or tool that says the drug is tolerable or not, because it's more than patient's view of the impact of side effects.
Yeah. Dawn, from your side, from the biostat side, what are your thoughts on the PRO tools and regulator views?
Yeah. Well, as Ari said, there's no one tool, but there are some common instruments that are used to try to get at this as part of the piece of the puzzle, right? Currently, the measures that are being used in studies are the FACT-GP5, which asks patients, am I bothered by side effects of treatment? And there's also an item from the EORTC, item 168. And so you'll see those often collected in studies to try to assess tolerability along with, the other components of that Ari mentioned. I think that that's something that studies are collecting more and more of. We recently saw a label in fact GP5 where they assessed and analyzed the mean percent of time with high side effect of bother. And this was in the product label along with information on the percent of patients who discontinued due to adverse events. So kind of back to that part that Ari said, where we're looking at multiple information to assess tolerability.
Yeah, thank you, Dawn. So the other tools that Dawn referred to, and as I said earlier, so that's only a small part of the evaluation of tolerability. Tolerability is a conclusion based on many parameters. And one of the things that we did recently, we reviewed a bunch of clinical trials that came to the conclusion that drugs were tolerable. And one of the things that we found was that only about 8% of the published manuscripts made use of PROs. It just shows that although the regulators have started to talk about tolerability as an important component of overall benefit risk evaluation of drugs, the industry is not yet there to make sure that the patient's view is included in the part of the evaluation. And there is also the methods to analyze the data. I don't think they are there yet. Dawn, why don't you say something about that?
Yeah, that's right. There is a lack of standardization in methods. I think mostly because it's an evolving area. And so people are still working on that. And so there's been some recent literature on this topic, including some nice articles summarizing current methods. Most of them are descriptive. You'll see a lot of visuals such as stack bar charts and butterfly plots, which has been encouraged by the FDA and others. You'll see when the goal is to be comparative across the treatments, and that's an objective, that you'll see things looking at comparison of the means over time, or some type of time to analysis to understand when that toxicity first appears, or a cumulative analysis that builds over time. But again, it's mostly descriptive, and you are seeing more and more methods to try to quantify it in a more comparative sense.
Great. Ari, what are your thoughts around where and how tolerability fits into pharma's product launch planning, especially when we're thinking about that cross-functional team that's on them supporting that asset, that clinical program, et cetera?
Now, how some companies or sponsors have done this well is by looking at their market, seeing that, okay, we have a crowded market. How are we going to distinguish ourselves? What other value statements can pull us apart from the rest of the crowd and going towards achieving that goal? So one of the examples that Dawn mentioned, that, where the tolerability PRO was included in the label, it was very clear that the sponsor was keen to make sure that that value statement gets into the label or becomes predominant in their value statements, and that they planned it from very early. And my guess is that there was a lot of discussion between the regulators, the FDA especially, and the sponsors on the analytical methods and the parameters for assessing the outcomes to achieve that separation. And what we have seen internally and also from some publications is that, yes, cancer drugs do have all these adverse events, but patients are not too bothered by them in general. And that's a very different view of the adverse events. Instead of seeing a safety data set saying, grade 1 to 3 and all grades adverse events, to be able to say, yes, we have these issues, but patients are not bothered by them or generally not bothered by them. It's a different lens altogether.
Yeah. And that's a great launching point for the next part of the discussion around, okay, we've done all these controlled clinical trials, all those things and the parameters around RCTs. But when it comes to looking at tolerability in the real world setting, what are some things that we can think about there for our pharma clients as they look to continue to assess tolerability in the real world setting?
Well, I think that, one of the things that Ari and I have talked about is the fact that, looking at adherence in the real world as a real measure of tolerability. Is the patient in the real world actually adhering to the treatment? And I think that's going to be one of the key things that people are looking at, because ultimately that's the goal. Is this something that a patient can adhere to over time?
So that's sort of points to a philosophical kind of stand, is that tolerability is a surrogate concept for adherence. It's like progression-free survival or overall response rate is a surrogate of survival data. Tolerability, whether patients can tolerate a cancer medication or not, is really a surrogate for adherence. Now, we talked about internally patients might be having benefit to risk assessment, and it might differ for individuals or segments of patients. But the final hard endpoint is whether they stay with the drug as long as they should to experience the desired outcome. If they do not adhere, if they drop out, or if they demand a different medication, that is the endpoint. It doesn't matter whether if they can tolerate it and then sort of experience the desired outcome, or not tolerate it and experience the desired outcome. It doesn't matter. The thing is, they stayed under. So in real world, like Dawn says, whether someone tolerates it or not, I don't know whether that matters or not. The thing is, it's adherence. Whether they stayed on until the end.
Yeah. Or maybe some other type of real world data collection survey work that pharma partners can think about in that setting to at least assess what that looks like beyond those hard measures like adherence. Yeah. Some qualitative type of work continued in the real world. Yeah.
It'll be interesting if there's a survey of oncologists, lung cancer specialists or something, where we ask them how many times has a patient asked for a different medication, because they may ask, in the event there isn't one, that there isn't a choice, they may stay on. But just the fact that they're asking for one may be a signal that, that's another surrogate for tolerability, if you like, another way of looking at tolerability.
Yeah. And a lot of these are captured in EMR too, as well. Yeah. Dawn, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, what are the reasons that patients are telling their physicians and clinicians of why they want to potentially go on another treatment? I think that's also very impactful information.
So as we wrap this up and come to a close, any quick tips that you can suggest for our drug developer partners when it comes to generation, analysis, and communication of tolerability evidence? Do's and don'ts?
Well, I think first and foremost for me as a statistician is the plan early. I love that one. The earlier you plan, the better it's going to be all around.
And planning early is critical. But let's not forget, including the voice of the patient is equally critical, because without the voice of the patient included in the decision-making process, one cannot claim something is tolerable in behalf of someone else. It's not up to the physicians to say, or clinicians to say a drug is tolerable. It's up to the patient to say whether the drug is tolerable or not.
When you think about it, at the core of this, we're really here to make patient lives better. So including their voice is especially very important in the process. Okay, great. So thanks for listening to Pharma Unscripted from RTI Health Solutions, where knowledge leads to understanding and strategy drives impact. As we've discussed, tolerability is becoming a critical part of the evidence story in oncology, bringing the patient experience into sharper focus alongside safety and efficacy. And as this dimension gains importance, it's also starting to influence how evidence is interpreted in broader decision-making contexts. That's especially relevant as new frameworks like joint clinical assessment begin to take shape. In our next episode, we'll take a closer look at the first JCA submission, focusing on pediatric low-grade glioma and oncology indication, and explore how tolerability was evaluated, what we're learning so far, and what it could mean for how evidence is assessed, compared, and ultimately used to inform access decisions across Europe. Thanks for listening.